The holy grail of carbon reduction has long been to capture carbon dioxide and store it underground. But some projects, notably at Chevron's Giant's Gorgon gas project in Western Australia, have failed to meet their targets. Ross Greenwood caught up with Alex Zapantis, the chief executive of the carbon capture think tank, the Global CCS Institute, and asked him about its future, given there are other ways for companies to mitigate their emissions.
So every analysis that's been done, really going back to Pacala and Sokolow's famous wedges paper, which is almost 20 years ago, finds that you need a very broad portfolio of approaches to chart the least cost, least risk pathway down towards zero emissions or net zero emissions. CCS is just one of those technologies which is absolutely critical, particularly in industries where in some cases there are no other options because the industry produces inherent emissions of carbon dioxide that are a function of the chemistry of the process, not the energy source.
Okay, so your membership includes, say, the British government, the Victorian government, it includes the Scottish government, there is carbon emissions from each of those as a result of the extraction of hydrocarbons. But the one point about this is, does this require more government money, more assistance to encourage those organisations that are emitting to really try and, encourage this carbon capture and storage?
So what's required is policy that makes a business case for investment in CCS. And there are some really good examples of this around the world. So, for example, in the US, there are very significant tax credits which are now available, offering up to $85 per tonne of carbon dioxide stored for CCS. In Europe, of course, you have a good carbon price, which is greatly valuable in terms of incentivising CCS. But there is also support from the EU Innovation Fund, which is billions of euros overall, which is supporting investment in CCS. So CCS is a bit like renewables were, say, 20 years ago. It's an emerging nascent industry. It needs government policy to really make that business case for investment in CCS. There are many ways of doing that. Some of that might be provision of funds. Other might be through regulation, through assistance, through the provision of essential infrastructure, for example. So there are many ways of doing it, but it does need some sort of policy driver, as do pretty much all climate mitigation investments, which are purely for climate mitigation purposes.
Okay, but here in the 2017 budget, the Turnbull government at that time announced the cessation of the Low Emissions Technology Demonstration Fund. And then, of course, there was a carbon capture and storage flagships program in the financial year 2019 wiped out. So effectively, the federal government here has walked away from the funding and the encouragement of carbon capture and storage projects. Is that the way you see it?
Those are historical programs that were focused on demonstration projects. So they actually weren't about commercial deployment. They were about demonstrations, small-scale pilot projects.
Okay, so is there enough incentive for the commercial, apart from such as Gorgon being forced by the WA government to actually implement it as part of the development approval process for that gas development project?
We believe there needs to be more. We believe the commercial incentives for investment in CCS in Australia are insufficient for Australia to chart its course to net zero emissions according to the least cost, least risk route. So there are some incentives available here now. For example, you can create Australian carbon credit units through the undertaking of CCS project, and they're trading at about $30 or thereabouts a tonne. So that's a significant incentive. In fact, it's assisted with Santos's Moomba project to get that over the line to FID. But clearly, if our ambition is to get to net zero, this country needs to do a lot more across all sectors, using all technologies, CCS just being one of them. And there will need to be additional policy measures put in place to really drive the billions of dollars of private capital investment into this space that's necessary to establish these projects.
Okay, we'll go to a couple of the projects here. Gorgon is one I've mentioned. In the case of Gorgon, they're right now buying carbon credits and looking for other offset programs because they have not been able to achieve the targets that have been set down by the WA government in the production of the gas through Chevron, the owner and operator, at that Gorgon gas field. Is that showing a lack of veracity of the cases that have been put in place for carbon capture and storage?
Not at all. So Gorgon is one project. And if you look at any industry, you'll find examples where, for all sorts of reasons, particular projects have particular difficulties. Gorgon is having a very particular difficulty with the with the water production wells. It's not the case, that's not representative of the experience across broader all of the other 30 operating CCS projects that are operating around the world. So, Gorgon is often held up as some sort of demonstration of the failure of CCS. The fact is, Gorgon to date has stored well over 6 million tonnes of CO2, which would otherwise have gone into the atmosphere. They've stored 3 or 4 times more CO2 in the same period than the largest project funded under the Emissions Reduction Fund.
Okay, so let's go to another one then. The Chute Creek ExxonMobil project in the United States is the biggest in the world. That's the one that people hold up there as being by far and away much bigger than Gorgon, which I think is the 4th largest in the world right now. So in that case, 50% of the carbon has been vented, 50% has been stored. What are the targets long term? Because obviously 50% being vented into the atmosphere is still not considered to be a good outcome. Where does it need to be into the future?
So what you need to consider about Chute Creek is how old is that project? It's decades old.
Yeah.
It was established many, many years ago for enhanced oil recovery, and how much carbon you capture in any CCS project is a commercial decision. So today the incentives for high levels of capture are very much stronger than they were 20, 30, 50 years ago. 50 years ago when the first CCS projects actually started operation in the United States. If you look at the current fleet of CCS projects which are in development, they're all targeting 95% or thereabouts capture because that's what's required.
And so here in Australia, the one that people hold up is really the Moomba gas fields, right? And this is the Santos project, the Cooper Basin, where the gas is extracted, and therefore the common sense is the infrastructure is there to be able to process carbon dioxide and pour it back into the reservoirs from which the gas has already been extracted. That almost seems to be the holy grail of projects.
That is certainly the lowest cost opportunity, and there will be many of those around the world where you already have the infrastructure, you already have really good knowledge of the subsurface, so you're not needing to spend a lot of resource on identifying your storage resource, and you have the right industry with the right expertise for which that particular practice is, quite frankly, their day job. But there will be other projects which are not so easy as that, which will require stronger policy support really to bring that private capital in.
Okay, and then the final part about this is your organisation, as I say, a think tank. It argues that companies and nations around the world will not be able to achieve their net zero emissions targets unless carbon capture and storage not only is technically sound, but also has sufficient capital invested in it to create these projects around the world.
That's exactly right. And it's not just us that's saying that. That's on the back of analysis by the IPCC, by the International Energy Agency, by any number of academics and other think tanks that have looked at how do you actually achieve net zero emissions. There are certain industries which produce CO2 emissions for which there is no other option other than to capture that carbon dioxide and then geologically store it. CCS is the answer to that. Now, in order to make that work, the technology is there. I mean, some of this technology is almost 100 years old. It's being improved and enhanced, of course, in recent times, but it's far from new. But you need the commercial business case to drive the private capital into this sector to build the projects. If it's not profitable or it doesn't create value for business, business won't invest in it. And the broader social need that we have, which is around a stable climate and lower carbon dioxide emissions, won't be met. So absolutely, CCS is absolutely critical to getting to net zero, as is everything else, by the way. CCS is not some sort of silver bullet here. You need absolutely everything. And if anything is off the table, the cost and risk goes up. That is a consistent finding of pretty much every rigorous analysis that's ever been done since climate became an issue.
Alex Zapantis from the Global CCS Institute, many thanks for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.